I knew something was wrong the second that pontoon boat sliced across the lake like it owned the water it floated on. Not the usual lazy weekend drifters, not tourists. This one moved with intention, with entitlement, with the stiff-backed arrogance of someone convinced the world rearranged itself to suit their demands. I was standing on my dock, boots damp, documenting the morning waterline the way I always did. A quiet ritual, a sheriff's habit, a moment of order before the day began. The sun hadn't even finished climbing, but that boat cut through the calm like a blade. I didn't need binoculars. I didn't need an introduction. I recognized the posture, the stiffness, the dead-eyed certainty. HOA Karen had arrived. Before we go any further, comment below. Where are you watching from right now? She stepped off that boat like she was descending onto land she already owned. Linen blazer pressed into submission, smile stretched tight, eyes glassy and predatory. Two people flanked her, a lawyer carrying a briefcase thick enough to smother a lawsuit and a clipboard-clutching assistant recording every breath I took. Karen didn't greet me, didn't acknowledge the boundary she'd just trespassed. She extended a folder like a queen bestowing judgment. Inside were drone photos, my solar panels circled in red, my dock outlined like a crime scene, my erosion reinforcements labeled environmental disruption. Lies dressed as concern. Manipulation coded in legal jargon. She spoke in that artificial sweetness only people hungry for control ever use. Sheriff Marshall, Pinewater Reserve has unanimously voted to assume jurisdiction over the lake. She said it like her HOA vote carried the force of state law, like her personal desires were municipal authority, like her little suburban kingdom had suddenly become a ruling government. I stared at her for a long moment and let the silence do the talking. Then I lifted my badge. Not aggressively, not theatrically, just enough for the sun to catch the metal and for her lawyer's confidence to evaporate. What statute? I asked calmly. Do you believe gives your HOA authority over sovereign private property? The first crack appeared in her smile. Small, tight, revealing the truth behind the facade. People like Karen never expect pushback. They expect fear. They expect compliance. They expect everyone around them to fold like cheap paper at the first whiff of conflict. But she stepped onto the wrong dock, onto the wrong land, onto the wrong man's mourning. I watched her face twitch just once as the reality hit her. She'd tried to seize something she didn't understand. A legacy, a fortress, a piece of land built on ironclad legality long before Pinewater existed. But that wasn't even the half of it. When Karen flicked her eyes at her lawyer, silently demanding backup, he flashed a badge. Shiny, mass-produced, laughably fake. I didn't need training to spot it. Years of law enforcement give you a sixth sense for false authority. He stammered something about community compliance jurisdiction, words strung together like he'd swallowed a dictionary of HOA nonsense. I didn't blink. I didn't step back. I didn't give them the reaction they wanted. I simply said, that badge is not recognized by this county, and neither is your authority. Karen's smile collapsed into its true shape. Cold entitlement, simmering rage, and the unmistakable spark of someone who isn't used to losing. She leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper meant to intimidate. You won't own this island much longer. And in that moment, I knew she'd crossed a line she could never step back from. She hadn't just threatened a sheriff. She'd threatened Eleanor's legacy, my family's refuge, the one place in the world untouched by HOA control. I watched her step back onto her pontoon boat, fury leaking through her polished facade. She didn't wave, didn't look back, didn't hide the storm brewing in her eyes. As the boat drifted away, cutting through the reflection of the rising sun, I stood perfectly still, towel over my shoulder, and felt something inside me shift. Not fear, not anger. Resolve. Because if Karen wanted a war built on fake authority, lies, and paperwork, she had just challenged the one man in the county trained to bury people like her in the truth. And she had no idea how deeply she'd miscalculated. 3 years before Karen ever weaponized a drone or waved a forged document in my face, my life moved to a calmer rhythm, steady, predictable, built on discipline earned through years of service. I wasn't thinking about land disputes or legal warfare. My biggest worries back then were the occasional domestic call, the reckless teenagers drag racing on back roads, or the stubborn paperwork piling on my desk after a long shift. When my mornings began, they began with quiet. Black coffee, cold air, the hum of a county just waking up. That was who I was, Sheriff Theo Marshall. A man who believed order was still possible, who believed rules meant something, who believed that if you followed the law and respected the land would respect you back. I had no idea I was standing on a powder keg that would one day explode in my face. When Aunt Eleanor passed, it felt like the world lost a storm. She was sharp-witted, stubborn, brilliant in ways that forced people to raise their eyebrows or admire her tenacity from a safe distance. I expected a small inheritance, a box of maps, some antique cookware, maybe a modest share of her lake house furniture. What I didn't expect was the sealed envelope her attorney handed me, heavy with the weight of something far more meaningful than money. "Theo," her letter said in her unshakable script, "the island is yours. Keep it safe." I didn't take her seriously at first. I thought she was being poetic or sentimental. I thought she meant a sentimental patch of shoreline she liked to picnic on. But when I took my boat out and saw it, a little rise of land in the center of the water that shouldn't have existed but somehow did, I understood. She meant a real island, one she built herself. What started as a shallow bump beneath the lake became a physical testament to her will. She hauled gravel for years, working through winters that would send most people inside. She reinforced the shoreline with rock and timber, planted vegetation that dug its roots into the soil like guardians, and filed permits with such precision the county clerks quietly referred to her as a one-woman legal hurricane. Everything she built had a paper trail longer than Pine Water's entire HOA charter: deeds, water rights, environmental studies, parcel registration, tax assessments. She hadn't created a quirky retreat. She created sovereignty, a legally recognized parcel fortified by bureaucracy and brilliance, untouchable if you understood the system. Absolutely irresistible to the kind of predator who doesn't. I spent a full year after inheriting the land sorting through her documents. They were meticulous, airtight, crafted with the mind of someone who foresaw conflict before it came. I followed her blueprint exactly. I hired contractors to reinforce the shoreline even further, expanded the land by inches, all approved, built a modern micro-cabin powered entirely by solar and rainwater, installed a composting system that could pass inspection in 3 different states. I wasn't just living on that island. I was preserving a legacy that demanded respect. My family fell in love with the place instantly. Weekends transformed into memories my kids still talk about. Fishing rods clattering on the dock, the dog snoring in the sun. Board games spread out across the cabin while the world beyond the lake felt 1,000 miles away. My wife found peace there, the kind of peace you don't realize you're missing until you finally feel it again. Even as sheriff, even with the weight of the county's problems pressing against me daily, the island gave me back something pure. Silence, privacy, and the rare chance to breathe without the world clawing at my time. The lake was nothing remarkable on a map. 40, maybe 50 acres. Farmland surrounded one side, old-growth trees shaded the other, and suburbia edged closer each year like a slow-moving tide. Most people ignored it. Too small for fishing tournaments, too shallow for speedboats, too inconvenient for tourism. Perfect. Or it was perfect, until Pine Water Reserve sprouted on the eastern slope, growing like a plastic garden left out in the rain. Pine Water's arrival changed the air around the lake. You could feel it. The neighborhood sold itself with pretentious marketing, words like curated lifestyle, elevated living experience, community governance excellence. Their lawns looked manufactured, carved with laser lines. Their sidewalks smelled like detergent. They were the kind of people who held committee meetings about whether garden hoses should face north or south. At first, their presence was harmless. Kayakers paddled by, waving awkwardly. Parents pulled their curious kids away whenever they drifted too close to my shore, whispering like my cabin was some forbidden bunker. Brochures landed on my shore advertising lakefront unity and water resource management. I tossed them aside. I figured they'd stay in their lane. But power-hungry people never stay in their lane. The first real warning sign didn't come from a loud confrontation or angry letter. It came from a glossy pine water brochure, the kind they stuffed into mailboxes like gospel, washed up on my shoreline. The lake in the aerial photo sparkled blue, every house digitally polished until they glowed. The sky was filtered into sunset gold. Everything perfect, everything pristine, everything curated. Except the island. My island. Eleanor's island. It wasn't labeled. It wasn't colored. It wasn't even acknowledged. It was blurred out. A gray smudge in the center of a perfect painting. Erased before they ever tried to take it. When I saw that, something cold stirred in my stomach. Pine Water wasn't admiring the lake, they were surveying it. They weren't building a community, they were expanding a territory. HOA-driven power doesn't show up with bulldozers. It shows up with language, with implications, with small edits meant to shift perception before it shifts ownership. I knew predators. I'd arrested enough of them, and the lake was beginning to feel like a place being watched by eyes that didn't blink. Yet even then, I didn't see the full storm coming. I didn't know a woman named Karen Wilson had just been elected HOA President with a 94% approval rating, a percentage only possible when residents are too intimidated to vote against you. I didn't know she was building committees inside committees, consolidating authority, tightening her grip in ways most cities couldn't legally attempt. I didn't know she already had her sights set on my shoreline. All I knew was that the quiet of the lake had shifted. The air felt heavier. The water felt watched. The island no longer felt like a secret. It felt like a target. Looking back, it's obvious. Karen didn't just want to enforce rules. She wanted to own the narrative, the land, the lake, everything her eyes touched. And when someone like her notices a piece of land untouched by her authority, she doesn't ignore it. She circles it. She studies it. She imagines it under her control. And she convinces herself she's entitled to it. That was the beginning. The quiet before the war. The last breath of peace before Karen made her move. Pine Water Reserve didn't rise by accident. It wasn't built on neighborly goodwill or community spirit. It was engineered, brick by brick, rule by rule, vote by manipulated vote, into one of the most aggressively controlled HOAs the county had ever seen. Even before Karen stood on my dock with her fake jurisdiction and weaponized smile, her influence had already bled through every inch of that development. She didn't run the HOA. She consumed it. And Pine Water's residents, whether they realized it or not, were living under a regime masquerading as suburban order. The HOA board didn't look like a governing body. It looked like a court of loyal subjects too afraid to oppose the Queen. Meetings weren't discussions. They were coronations. Karen sat at the center of every table, notepads undisturbed, minutes pre-written, decisions finalized before the doors even opened. Residents didn't vote, they nodded. They didn't question, they complied. And the few who dared resist quickly found notices taped to their doors citing infractions no sane person could justify. Excessive mailbox gloss, unauthorized lawn texture, insufficient porch color harmony. They were fines disguised as discipline, punishments disguised as policy. Pinewater wasn't a community. It was a well-dressed dictatorship with a treasury fueled by fear. It wasn't long before Karen carved out her own hierarchy. She appointed community liaisons, which was just her polite way of naming informants. Every cul-de-sac had one. Someone reporting disturbances, tracking non-conformities, documenting anything she could repurpose into discipline. She loved information. She collected it the way some people collect seashells, except she weaponized every piece. A late trash bin? Documented. An unapproved garden statue? Documented. A guest parking 3 inches outside a designated line? Documented. And every resident learned the same lesson quickly. Karen's HOA didn't govern behavior. It governed fear. The worst part was the subtlety. Karen didn't bark orders or storm into homes. She didn't need to. Her power came from whispers, from suggestions, from the illusion that resisting her would cost more than anyone was willing to pay. She mastered the art of intimidation without ever raising her voice. Her meetings felt like sermons. Her newsletters read like decrees. Her presence carried the smugness of someone who believed she sat above every law except the ones she wrote herself. And, as Pinewater grew, so did her ambition. I began hearing murmurs long before she crossed the lake. Vendors complaining about special, expedited permit fees. Contractors mentioning how Pinewater required environmental harmony assessments, signed only by consultants Karen personally hired. Residents muttering about HOA board elections where the only candidates were people Karen had already approved. The deeper I looked, the more I realized Pinewater didn't have a power structure. Karen was the power structure. And she was preparing it for something bigger than mailbox policing. There were signs everywhere. Meetings discussing future lake cohesion. Survey teams walking the perimeter with clipboards and measuring wheels. Vague phrases like community integration plans and expanded jurisdictional considerations. The kind of language that hides a land grab beneath layers of pretty phrasing. The kind of language used when someone is planning something bold but wants deniability ready-made. Karen wasn't just building influence, she was preparing an expansion, and expansions required justification. That's where the lies began. Complaints started appearing about unsafe lakefront access points, reports of unregulated erosion zones, a sudden spike in potential water contamination risks. None of them real. All of them crafted to support a narrative. That Pinewater needed more authority, more jurisdiction, more power. And in the center of those reports, highlighted, circled, repeatedly mentioned, was my island. The land Eleanor had bled, argued, and built into a fortress of legality. The one place on that lake Karen couldn't touch. And people like Karen cannot tolerate the existence of anything they can't control. Even before she tried to step foot on my dock, Pine Water's committees were quietly rewriting the lake in their documentation. Maps distributed at HOA meetings labeled the water as shared community property. Minutes from environmental subcommittees referenced Central Lake Asset. Reports listed my land as unreviewed parcel. Every single line was designed to prime residents into believing Pine Water had a claim to something that never belonged to them. It wasn't ignorance, it wasn't carelessness. It was deliberate psychological groundwork. And it worked. Pine Water residents started eyeing my island like it was something owed to them, like it was a community resource I was selfishly hoarding. Some kayakers paddled closer. Some walked the lake path with cameras pointed directly at my land. Some whispered among themselves as if waiting for Karen to give them permission to complain officially. The shift was subtle but chilling. Pine Water stopped treating the island as my property and started treating it as theirs. That was the moment I understood Karen wasn't acting alone. She had a structure underneath her, a chain of influence, people who fed her information, people who carried out her orders, people who enforced her vision of the lake even before she announced it. And that realization hit me with the weight of a cold wave. HOAs, like Pine Water, don't crumble easily. They dig in, they multiply pressure, they exploit every loophole, leverage every weakness, weaponize every document. And when they want something badly enough, they drag their entire board behind them like a tidal force. But Karen wasn't just building a bureaucracy. She was building momentum, preparing, positioning, calculating. When she arrived on my dock that morning, folder in hand, smirk ready, lawyer lurking behind her like a malformed shadow, she wasn't improvising. She was executing phase 1 of a plan she'd been building for months. And every inch of Pine Water's machine existed to support her. She thought she knew the law. She thought she knew the county. She thought she knew how far she could push. She thought she'd bury me under her paperwork empire. But she forgot one thing. The man she targeted wasn't a resident. He wasn't a retiree. He wasn't a homeowner too tired to fight. He was the sheriff. And the moment she tried to impose her fabricated authority onto me, she activated every ounce of discipline, experience, and resolve the badge had carved into me over decades. She woke the wrong man. She provoked the wrong legacy. She challenged the wrong island. And she had absolutely no idea how badly the law was going to break her back for it. The morning after Karen's little performance on my dock, I woke with a tension in my chest I hadn't felt since my early days as a deputy. The kind that tells you a storm isn't coming, it's already here, and you're the only one who hears the thunder. Karen didn't bluff. People like her never bluff. They build, they plan, they weaponize paper long before they ever weaponize people. Everything she said on that pontoon boat, every carefully rehearsed phrase dripping with fake authority, had weight behind it. I knew the HOA machine was already in motion, and if I didn't get ahead of it, I'd be buried under their paperwork avalanche before I even understood what they were trying to pull. I drove to the county records office in full uniform, not because I needed to, but because wearing the badge stopped people from asking questions I didn't have time to answer. The building smelled like dust, old binders, and burnt coffee. I'd walked through those doors 1,000 times during my career, but that morning it felt like I was stepping into a war room. Because I wasn't here for routine business. I was here to dismantle whatever Karen thought she was constructing behind the curtain. Drew, the clerk on duty, looked up from his desk with that half-bored, half-amused expression he wore like a uniform. Marine Corps tattoo curling down his arm, thick glasses perched crooked on his nose. He was a man who found joy in paperwork the way some people find joy in fishing. If there was a loophole in a zoning code or an outdated regulation in a land registry from 1984, Drew knew where it lived. "Morning, Sheriff," he said. "You're early. That usually means trouble." "Pine water trouble," I replied, leaning on the counter. His smile died instantly. "Oh, hell. What'd they do now?" "Everything," I said, "and I need every filing they've submitted in the last 12 months. He cracked his knuckles like he was warming up for battle. Within seconds, his keyboard clattered with a speed that would embarrass a court stenographer. The printer sputtered to life, spitting out documents like a slot machine hitting a jackpot no one wanted. I grabbed the first stack. The initial page stopped me cold. Pinewater Reserve had filed a petition, quietly, strategically, to reclassify the entire lake as a community-managed recreational ecosystem. The phrasing sounded friendly unless you knew the law, unless you understood the trick buried inside those words. A reclassification like that could give an HOA leverage over how the lake was accessed, monitored, and, if they argued hard enough, regulated. My island was circled in red. Not once, not twice, 3 times. The wording accused unregulated shoreline alteration, unverified water runoff systems, and unapproved solar expansion impacting visual harmony of the environment. Visual harmony. They were using aesthetic complaints to insinuate environmental violations. Karen wasn't just sneaky, she was dangerous. I flipped page after page, and with every line my jaw tightened. Pinewater's petition hadn't been submitted under the HOA's name alone. The paperwork referenced a secondary entity, a development firm called Coastal Delta Holdings LLC. I'd never heard of them. Drew had. He pulled up another file on his monitor. "Sheriff, this isn't just HOA overreach. This is bigger, a lot bigger." "What am I looking at?" "A multi-phase development proposal." He tapped the screen. "Lakefront expansion, community spa, floating amenities. But look at the centerpiece." He zoomed in. My island. Gone. Replaced by a 2-story luxury villa with a wraparound deck, private dock, solar cabanas, and a brand stamp at the bottom. Delta Wellness Experience. A villa worth millions, built on ground they didn't own, didn't control, and had no legal claim to. And the accompanying note twisted my stomach into a knot. Pending jurisdictional resolution of existing private encroachment. Existing private encroachment. Me. My family. My cabin. Eleanor's legacy. They were rewriting ownership as intrusion. I turned the page and found emails, some from Pinewater, some from Coastal Delta, and some from a name I recognized immediately. Karen Wilson. Her message was short, polished, and dripping with elitist arrogance. "Once the island's regulatory complications are resolved, Phase 2 construction can begin Q2 next year. Investors are enthusiastic." I stared at those lines until my pulse hammered in my ears. Karen hadn't stepped onto my dock to discuss concerns. She'd stepped onto my dock to test the strength of the fence before she kicked it down. She wasn't improvising. She was executing. Her smile, her folder, her drone photos. They weren't intimidation tactics. They were groundwork. And she expected me to fold. She expected me to panic. She expected me to drown in bureaucracy. But she forgot who she was dealing with. I left the records office with a binder thick enough to use as a riot shield. I didn't drive straight back to the lake. I went to the one person ruthless enough to tear Pinewater apart with nothing but a legal pad and a sharpened pen. Cassidy, my attorney. Her office used to be an old post office, the kind that smelled like ink and dust. Now it smelled like candles, case law, and impending doom for anyone who walked in with bad intentions. When I walked through the door, she looked up from a stack of active cases balanced like a house of cards. "Theo," she said, "your face tells me you either found gold or a bomb." "No. Both," I replied, dropping the binder onto her desk with a thud. She opened it, flipped one page, then another, and her eyebrows climbed higher with every line. "Holy hell," she whispered. "They're setting you up. They're building a framework to steal your island with a smile." I crossed my arms. "Can they?" "Not legally," she said, "but they can bury you in inspections. They can hit you with access restrictions. They can invent violations. They can choke you with red tape until you can't breathe. Unless what? Unless we get ahead of them." And just like that, Section 4 of this nightmare snapped into focus. Karen had built a machine designed to suffocate me. But I wasn't just a homeowner. I was the sheriff. And the only thing more dangerous than an HOA president with ambition is a lawman who knows exactly where the cracks are, because he's patched them his whole career. Karen thought she had the advantage. She thought paperwork would drown me. She thought bureaucracy would break me. But she didn't know the truth yet. I swim just fine in deep water. And she'd just kicked her legs into the lake with the sheriff watching. By the time I left Cassidy's office with the binder under my arm, the sun was sliding behind the hills, casting long shadows over the lake like the day itself was warning me. They're already moving. I'd expected Pinewater to retreat after Karen's failed performance on my dock, but predators don't run when they're cornered. They escalate. And the moment I pulled up to the shoreline, I realized Karen hadn't wasted a single hour. Construction equipment had appeared across the lake like an invading force, survey flags stabbing the soil, workers unloading lumber, generators humming, and the beginnings of a public pier rising from the shoreline. Not a modest dock, not a simple walkway. This was oversized, overbuilt, deliberately positioned directly across from my island. A beacon planted like a territorial claim. Pinewater wasn't pretending anymore. They weren't tiptoeing. They were making a declaration. I stood there a while, binoculars pressed to my face, watching Jill, Karen's clipboard soldier, gesturing at the lake as if she were mapping out troop movements. She pointed at my island again and again, stabbing the air with the confidence of someone who believed she had immunity. Contractors nodded as she unfurled blueprints bigger than she was. Even from a distance, I recognized the outlines. They weren't building a pier for the community. They were building an access point, a foothold, for the takeover already sketched in their investor deck. My jaw clenched as I lowered the binoculars. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't miscommunication. This was a land grab executed under the camouflage of community improvement, and Pinewater was acting fast because they knew once I uncovered their filings, their window was closing. But they didn't know something far more dangerous. I had already closed it. I grabbed my radio and called Deputy Hargrove. My voice stayed calm, steady, but the air around me felt electrically charged. "Log a preliminary inquiry," I said. "Construction on the northeast shoreline. Possible zoning conflict." "Copy, Sheriff," he replied. No accusations, no shutdown, just a timestamp, a legal footprint. A quiet marker that would later become one of the nails in Pinewater's coffin. Karen wanted me angry. She wanted me storming up the shoreline shouting, abusing my authority. She wanted headlines she could twist into victimhood, but I wasn't giving her anything except paperwork she couldn't outrun. I returned to the island that evening with a heavy weight in my chest. Not fear, not panic, just calculation. A sheriff's mind doesn't go to worst-case scenarios. It goes to inevitable ones. And the inevitable truth was that Karen wasn't done. Her fingerprints were already on too many documents, too many surveys, too many developer emails. The pier was just step 2. Step 3 came the next morning. I woke expecting quiet. Instead, a sleek white boat circled my island, slow and predatory. Big navy letters on the side read, Pinewater Lake Watch. 2 men on board, matching polos, sunglasses, clipboards, because Pinewater never did anything without a clipboard. They pretended not to see me as I stepped onto my dock. They circled once, twice, then eased toward my shoreline like they were docking at a property they already owned. "Afternoon," the first one said with manufactured authority. "We're conducting a routine compliance inspection." I didn't blink. "No, you're not." He tried again, softer. "We've received reports of unsafe shoreline structures or—" "No, you haven't." The second man grabbed the dock rail, preparing to step onto my land. "We're authorized by Pinewater Reserve to—" "Authorized by who?" I cut in. "Your HOA? Your board? Your Facebook group?" He lifted a silver badge clipped to his belt. Shiny, mass-produced, a toy for adults who liked pretending to be important. I laughed once. Dry, cold, enough to make his ears burn. "That badge," I said, "wouldn't get you past security at a bingo hall." His face tightened. "Sir, if you obstruct—" "Obstruct what? Your cosplay?" They didn't step onto my dock. They backed away, writing furiously on their clipboards, pretending they had authority when they had nothing but delusion. When they motored off, I didn't feel relief. I felt certainty. That fake patrol wasn't a scare tactic. It was reconnaissance. They were testing how close they could get before I reacted. Predators circling, waiting to see where I'd break. But they didn't break me. They pushed me. So they escalated again. That afternoon, I installed new motion sensors around the island, checked every camera, reinforced every lock. The routine steadied my mind, but even then, a strange heaviness clung to the air. A storm without wind, a warning without sound. As I tightened the last sensor, I glanced across the water and froze. A woman stood on the half-finished public pier. She pretended to admire the lake. Then she lifted her phone and pointed it straight at me. She zoomed in, zoomed out, adjusted her angle, filmed me like I was the intruder, like I was the threat, like she was documenting evidence for an incident that hadn't happened yet. I raised a polite hand, the universal gesture for "I see you." She extended her middle finger without hesitation. Not once. Twice. Then she kept recording. The shift was complete. They weren't just trying to take my island. They were trying to rewrite the narrative, position me as the problem, frame me, corner me, make me look unhinged, dangerous, unfit. People like Karen don't fight clean. They fight with perception, and perception spreads faster than truth. That was the moment I understood this wasn't an HOA dispute. It was a campaign. And campaigns don't end with warnings. They end with moves meant to break you. The next morning proved it. When I woke and stepped outside, the island felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. The air didn't move. The water didn't stir. Even the dog stayed close, ears pinned back as if waiting for something awful. I walked toward the utility shed, intending to check the solar inverter like I did every morning. I flipped the switch. The lights flickered, coughed, died. I climbed the ladder, opened the casing, and my stomach turned. The main conduit was sliced clean through. Not frayed, not weather damaged. Cut. Deliberately. With bolt cutters. I moved to the water filtration unit. The pipe looked untouched, until I saw a neat stack of river stones beneath it, too deliberate to be natural. Under the stones sat a small black device, blinking faintly. A GPS tracker. Industrial grade, wired, shielded, serial numbered. Not amateur equipment. Not accidental. Not cheap. Someone had been on my island. Someone had worked quietly in the dark. Someone had tracked me. Someone funded by the same company whose employees pretended to be law enforcement. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was here. And Pinewater wasn't acting in desperation. They were acting in confidence. They believed they had me cornered. They believed I was overwhelmed, isolated, powerless. But they forgot something crucial. They weren't hunting a victim. They were hunting the sheriff. And the first legal hit, my hit, was about to shatter their entire strategy. The morning I found the sliced conduit and the GPS tracker blinking like a taunt beneath the river stones, something in me hardened into steel. Not anger. Anger is sloppy. Not panic. Panic gets men killed. It was something colder, something sharper, a lawman's fury wrapped in discipline. The realization that this wasn't harassment anymore. This wasn't intimidation. This wasn't even a power play. This was a coordinated incursion on my land, my dignity, my family's safety, and Eleanor's legacy. HOA Karen had crossed from paperwork warfare into criminal territory. And once someone steps into that arena, my badge isn't just metal. It becomes a weapon backed by statutes, agencies, and consequences she couldn't even begin to imagine. Right. I didn't waste a second. I put the tracker into a padded case, crossed the lake, and drove straight to Nate, the cyber forensic specialist who treated encrypted data like most people treat crossword puzzles. His barn-turned lab buzzed with screens, wires, and the scent of too many energy drinks. When I placed the device on his desk, he didn't need convincing. One look at the serial engraving and his eyebrows shot up. "This isn't consumer tech," he murmured. "This is contract grade, corporate, maybe even government adjacent depending on the supplier." "Can you trace it?" I asked. His smile sharpened. "I can trace anything." Minutes later, 4 minutes to be exact, the truth hit the screen like a hammer. Northern Apex Risk Solutions. The same company whose fake officers had trespassed in my cabin. The same company whose employees had tried to intimidate me with novelty badges and counterfeit authority. The same company partially owned by Aaron Wilson, Karen's husband. The name lit up on the monitor like a confession. I stared at the number sequence, feeling the ground tilt beneath me. Everything connected. The drone photos, the fake patrol boat, the development plans, the pier construction, the surveillance, the break-in, the sabotage. It all funneled back to the same couple who believed their HOA presidency elevated them above the law. People like Karen don't operate alone. They operate with a mirror image behind them. Aaron was that mirror, a silent financier with a clean suit, a dirty network, and enough ego to think their little kingdom couldn't be touched. But they'd forgotten something the law never forgets. Paper trails. I left Nate's lab with a photo of the serial number, a sense of grim satisfaction, and a clarity I hadn't had in days. This was no longer a defensive battle. This was an offensive operation. And when the sheriff goes on the offensive, it's never loud. Never messy, never reckless. It's precise, surgical, relentless. By the time sunset poured gold across the lake, I returned to the island with a different purpose. Not to mourn the cut wires, not to panic over surveillance, but to prepare for retaliation. I reinforced the solar mounts, installed redundant camera uplinks, planted motion detectors around the perimeter, and fortified the cabin doors with hardware strong enough to withstand a battering ram. If Pine Water was coming again, they wouldn't find an easy target. They wouldn't find silence. They'd find the law waiting for them. And they came sooner than I expected. At 3:14 a.m., the motion alarm shrieked through the cabin. Not a false alert, not a raccoon, a real trigger. I grabbed the extinguisher and sprinted toward the dock. The air glowed orange. Flames tore across the wooden planks, fast, hungry, deliberate. Fire crawled along the walkway like it had been fed accelerant. Heat slapped my face as I blasted foam across the structure. 10 minutes of smothering the blaze felt like a lifetime. My lungs burned. My arms ached. But when the final ember died, I saw the truth in the charred remains. Someone had lit the fire. Someone who knew where the cameras were. Someone who smashed them before striking the match. And in the ashes lay a half-melted piece of plastic, laminated, cheap, unmistakable, the Pine Water Reserve HOA logo. They wanted me to know who did it. They wanted me rattled. They wanted me to break. Instead, they made a fatal mistake. They gave me evidence. By dawn, I had everything packed into an evidence case. I drove straight into town, ash still clinging to my hair, and planted the charred debris on Cassidy's desk. She stared at it, jaw tightening, eyes blazing. "They left their logo at the crime scene?" she said. "These idiots really think they're untouchable." She wasn't wrong, but they were about to learn how wrong they truly were. Nate arrived minutes later, jittering with caffeine, and plugged the broken trail cam core into his system. The footage was corrupted, but one image survived. A single frame caught between static bursts, a hand holding a blunt tool mid-swing, cutting power, smashing equipment, and on that wrist, a tattoo. Cassidy froze the frame, enhanced it, zoomed in. Then she exhaled a single word. Aaron. It was unmistakable. The same tattoo captured in photos from a corporate retreat. The same tattoo Aaron flaunted like a brand. The same tattoo now pinned in evidence linking him to vandalism, sabotage, and attempted arson. Cassidy leaned back, grinning like a wolf. "They're finished." From that moment forward, the retaliation was no longer defensive. It was strategic, methodical, designed to sever every thread Karen and Aaron had woven. Cassidy worked like a woman possessed. Filings flew from her printer with the velocity of bullets, emergency injunctions, requests for criminal investigation, motions to freeze HOA discretionary accounts, environmental compliance validations proving every structure on my island was legal, documented, and protected. Judicial review petitions, satellite data requests, cross-referenced permit logs. She didn't just match Pine Water's aggression. She overwhelmed it. By noon, we had a stack of legal firepower thick enough to crush Pine Water under its own lies. Cassidy sealed each document with the precision of someone who knew she wasn't just fighting an HOA. She was dismantling a criminal enterprise wearing pastels. But Karen didn't stay idle. She made her own move, the one she thought would secure her victory. The day before the hearing, Mia burst into Cassidy's office holding a tablet as if it were toxic. "You need to see this," she gasped. A town council livestream filled the screen. There stood Karen, pearls glinting, voice soft, smile sweet. She wasn't just lying. She was rewriting reality. "If we can resolve the private island issue," she said, "we can transform the land into a public wellness retreat, a gift to our community." The room fell silent. She was pitching my island, my land, Eleanor's legacy, the investor villa plans, word for word, while pretending it was a philanthropic gesture. Cassidy snapped her pencil. Mia muttered, "She's denying involvement with Coastal Delta while describing their project like she wrote it." I felt something cold settle inside me, a clarity sharper than rage. "This ends tomorrow," I said, "because she wasn't just trying to seize my land anymore. She was trying to rewrite the truth." And people who rewrite reality forget one thing. The truth always has witnesses. The courthouse had never seen a crowd like the one packed inside that Friday morning. Reporters lined the hallways, homeowners whispering in clusters, Pinewater residents sitting stiff and pale, as if they'd woken up inside the very nightmare they once believed their HOA was protecting them from. Even county officials slipped in, faces tight, sensing the political earthquake about to detonate. And in the middle of it all, in her pastel armor and pearl earrings, stood Karen Wilson, calm, composed, smiling that brittle, self-satisfied smile of someone who believed months of planning, deception, and sabotage were about to pay off. She carried herself like a queen striding into her coronation. But coronations turn into executions when the truth shows up. Her attorney, Martin, strutted forward first. He adjusted his suit like he believed it made him bulletproof. When the judge called the session to order, Martin stepped to the podium with a dramatic sigh, feigning the burden of representing a community shaken by dangerous, unregulated development. His voice dripped with artificial concern as he gestured toward Pinewater's stack of falsified complaints. "Your Honor," he began, "our community seeks only safety, environmental harmony, and rightful jurisdiction over a shared resource being misused by—" Cassidy didn't let him finish. She rose with a presence sharp enough to cut the air. "Your Honor," she interjected, "the island in question predates Pinewater Reserve by 30 years, is legally recorded as a sovereign private parcel, and is supported by every regulatory approval this county and state have ever required." The judge raised a brow. "Proceed." And Cassidy did, like a prosecutor dismantling a criminal syndicate brick by brick, lie by lie, document by document. She laid out the permits first. Every environmental clearance, every zoning approval, every notarized record Eleanor had filed. All of them irrefutable, all predating Pinewater's existence. Then she shifted to Pinewater's actions, her voice steady, controlled, devastating. She revealed the doctored drone photos, the falsified environmental concerns, the fake inspection notices, the expansion petition hidden behind vague legal language. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Then came the bombshell. The development plans, the investor deck, the Phase 2 villa blueprints, the Coastal Delta emails linking the HOA to private profit, the statement about removal of the current occupant. And then the evidence Pinewater never saw coming, the Northern Apex surveillance documents, the GPS tracker registration, the serial number tied to Wilson Holdings Group. But Cassidy wasn't done. She queued up a video clip from the town council livestream, the one where Karen pitched my island as a public wellness retreat. The judge watched in silence, jaw tightening, as Karen parroted the language from the investor deck word for word. When the clip ended, the courtroom was dead silent except for the soft squeak of someone shifting uncomfortably in their seat. Then Cassidy delivered the killing blow. She projected the enhanced trail cam frame, the image of the tattooed wrist swinging a tool in the dark. The same tattoo Aaron Wilson flaunted on social media. The same tattoo captured in corporate retreat photographs. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Wilson," he said slowly, "is your HOA acting in conjunction with a private development firm to forcibly acquire this man's land?" The color drained from Karen's face. Her smile cracked. Her lips parted, closed, parted again. The confidence evaporated like gasoline on pavement. Martin tried to object, flustered, but the judge shut him down with a hand. "Given the evidence," the judge announced, "I am issuing immediate orders." Time seemed to slow. Every person in that courtroom held their breath. "All Pinewater Reserve construction activities are to cease, effective immediately." A murmur rippled across the room. "All discretionary HOA accounts are frozen pending audit." Another wave of whispers. "This entire matter is referred to the county prosecutor for criminal investigation." The room erupted. Karen didn't move. She stood motionless, lips trembling, hands clenched around her designer portfolio like it could somehow shield her from the consequences she'd earned. Aaron wasn't there, but his shadow seemed to shrink, crushed beneath the reality closing in on them both. Cassidy leaned toward me and whispered, "They're done." She was right. But the end wasn't a single moment. The end unfolded over weeks, slow, painful, irreversible. The audit that followed uncovered what Cassidy called a corruption casserole. Community dues funneled into shell companies with names nobody could trace, consulting fees paid to vendors that didn't exist. Northern Apex invoices disguised as lake security enhancements. A literal surveillance balloon tethered above my island, costing $12,478, billed to the community as environmental observation equipment. The county prosecutor didn't drag his feet. Charges landed like hail in a thunderstorm. Fraud, unlawful surveillance, false representation of authority, conspiracy to commit arson, and more stacked on top for good measure. Karen was arrested first, escorted out of her pastel world in handcuffs she couldn't talk her way out of. Aaron followed days later, caught trying to shred documents that had already been digitized by investigators. Their empire, built on votes, vanity, and intimidation, collapsed like a rotted deck under too much weight. When their trial finally came, neither of them wore pearls or loafers or smug confidence. They wore orange. And when the verdict was read, guilty on all charges, the jury didn't hesitate. 12 years. No parole for at least 5. Justice didn't roar. Justice didn't cheer. Justice simply stood. And I stood with it. Pinewater Reserve dissolved shortly after, unable to survive the financial crater and the reputational mushroom cloud Karen left behind. The pier was torn down. The illegal patrol boats vanished. The surveillance operations died overnight. The residents, newly freed, tore down signs, rewrote rules, and apologized for letting a tyrant run their neighborhood like a monarchy. The lake breathed again. So did I. I rebuilt the dock using composite materials that fire couldn't chew through, upgraded the solar grid, buried backup batteries deep beneath the sand, strengthened every camera system. And when the work was done, I mounted a cedar sign where everyone could see it. Private property, sovereign parcel, not subject to HOA vote. The local paper printed a story titled, "Sheriff Saves His Island. HOA Crumbles Under Corruption Scandal." People stopped me in grocery stores to shake my hand. Kids from the nearby school visited the island for a civics project and brought a cake that read, Thanks for fighting the HOA, Sheriff. But the real victory wasn't the applause. It wasn't the headlines. It wasn't the courtroom collapse or the 12-year sentence. It was quieter than all of that. One evening, I sat on the dock with my kids, legs dangling over the water, the dog snoring at our feet. The lake was still again. Really still. Peacefully still. The way it had been before pine water infected its shores. My daughter looked up at the cedar sign and asked, "Does that mean no one can ever come here?" I laughed softly. "Of course not. People can visit. They just have to knock first." She giggled, and we watched the sun sink behind the hills. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like home reclaiming itself. Later, standing alone at the shoreline, I realized why Eleanor fought so hard to protect this place. Land isn't just dirt. It isn't just water and trees and sunlight. It's memory. It's history. It's the line we draw between what we love and what the world tries to take. And protecting it isn't something you do once. It's something you choose, again and again. Karen taught me a truth I'll never forget. Freedom doesn't disappear all at once. It slips away inch by inch, signature by signature, moment by moment, unless someone stands up and says, "Not here. Not this time. Not ever." When someone tries to steal what's yours, you don't whisper. You stand your ground. You hold your line. You use the law like a blade. And you never, ever back down.